Welcome back to Bat of Doom. We're here with Vis from the Phobos group. And he submitted a talk, and we very quickly looked at it and said, a talk by last year's KernelCon keynote about anybody want to launch some missiles? We're like, this is probably going to be accepted. And we read through it, and it was very good. And then we had a scheduling conflict, and it wasn't going to happen. And then COVID-19 or coronavirus came, and through a series of events, we've ended up connecting virtually. And Dan's had quite the time getting all of his stuff set up for this talk. I think it's going to be quite entertaining. And we are happy to have you here, Vis.
Thank you. This is while neat, you can't really breathe in this thing, as it turns out. It's not, what is it, N95 certified.
That's not a good safety mask.
Well, no, it needs some work.
Okay.
But, you know, that's another talk. Cool. Well, thank you for having me. I'm very pleased I was able to make it. Yeah, the original, amusingly, part of my talk covers this topic, which is too many security conferences all stomping each other. And sadly, I was not able to get the medal into this second slide that I wanted. But so with that, I guess I'll take it away. So hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us virtually. I'm going to do a lot of arm waving today about a talk that I've put together about using explosives to breach barriers in order to get to missile command centers. And my intention with phrasing it specifically that way was that I thought it would be really hilarious to get up in front of a room full of people that actually sit in a place in front of missile command centers and say, I'm going to give a talk about how to breach the perimeter and get to those consoles with the fancy buttons. So to begin, we're going to work our way backwards. And when I say that, I mean from the perspective of like an incident or a postmortem. Normally with a postmortem, you start with the rubble, what's left over after, you know, the smoldering remains of your target organization. You work way backwards to figure out what's the root cause scenario and that sort of thing. So we're going to go backwards. We're going to start at the very beginning, and we're going to work our way up to our digital binary explosives, and we're going to work our way towards making a boom. So I've come up with a sort of term recently to describe this phenomenon. I'm calling it digital binary explosives because it was sort of the most apropos thing. The concept here is similar to that of tannerite. If anybody listening is familiar with tannerite is basically, it's for people that shoot guns and want to have fun out in the desert, what have you. It's basically white powder. You put it in like a coffee pot or a bag or something, and you hit it with a high velocity round, like a rifle round, and it explodes with the force of TNT effectively. And the idea there is that if you're out in the boonies and you want to blow some stuff up, you totally can, and it's safe as long as you're behaving correctly and that sort of things. But yeah, the idea there is tannerite is not digital. Tannerite is in meat space with us. It is a binary explosive. You take two chemicals, you put them together, and you hit them with enough force, it creates a chain reaction, it explodes. There's other chemicals that do the same thing that are a lot more deadly, like mercury fulminate is one. Mercury fulminate is like, imagine if snap pops were able to pop with the power of a hand grenade, a little bit more dangerous. But in that case, we're talking about chemicals. And in this case, we're talking about sort of abstract ideas, specifically people's skills and credibility and companies' skills and credibility. And the complexity of both of those, the result being that combining them, on the internet, you will figuratively and sometimes literally have a scenario where stuff can explode if you poke it right. So 2019 was very colorful from a security standpoint, and we saw a huge uptick in breaches. All of them can be easily described as boxes of tannerite strewn willy-nilly and haphazardly across the internet, ready to explode essentially on command, permitting you, or us, the bad guy, to get missile launch control. So first, I would like to cover some previous research done by other folks just to set the stage. Up first, I'm taking some content from Alex Stamos and his Blue Hat 2019 keynote. He presented last year, and he covered some very important concepts that we're going to be incorporating into this talk today. So he's come up with this pretty great set of visuals that I'll be looting effectively. Thank you, Alex, to explain what the threat landscape is like and to sort of set your palette, set the stage for my content. It's worth explaining quickly just to sort of build a foundation. So he's got this food pyramid-like graphic where he describes the spread of different types of threats by volume, and that the vast majority of compromises by far and away beyond any other are like bad guessable passwords and password reuse, followed by patching, and then followed by config errors. And this is very well documented and well known and shouldn't be a surprise to anybody, but for some reason it's still a problem today across the board in 2020. Next, he's got this, and I think this is a lot of the really strong meat of his talk, is that he's got these equities that he talks about. Like a couple of examples from this graphic are things like data being portable and no data leakage, or like surveillance resistance as opposed to data being portable, or like censorship resistant or harassment free, right? So like, the way he describes it is you have this sort of star of equities, and as you move closer to some equities, you are forced to move away from the others on the opposite side. So unless you are insanely wealthy, and the people that are insanely wealthy have their own agendas here, but you can't do all of these at once because a lot of them are contradictory to one another. So it's difficult to find a middle ground. And for larger organizations that collect data or deal with like internet traffic, this is what they have to grapple with. And these are the equities that they have to make decisions about behind the scenes. And this is what people are deliberating and behind closed doors before they make the news, or if there's a problem or something like that. So the big problem here is that a lot of the people that are faced with these decisions literally just avoid making the decision outright, either because they're unqualified or they're ill-informed. And they have this like decision paralysis where like they're faced with making these large, heavy, weighty decisions, and that's too intimidating for them. So they just don't do it. And this is where you get these mountains of complexity that people love so much introduced, because they have to grapple with this stuff and they're just not prepared. So another very important point that gets covered is that companies seem to believe, and this was eye-opening for me, that they are incapable of doing wrong. Like companies believe that what they're doing has zero negative impact to anyone ever for any reason. Like in Alex's talk, he talks about Apple being almost cult-like in that regard, where they're just, it is impossible for Apple to do anything bad or wrong. And just the thought of it is off-putting, right? They never consider that data that they're collecting could be exposed or misused. So there's this ridiculous cognitive bias happening, which is like cult-like, where nothing bad could ever come from these big decisions made by these big companies. So he goes on to mention these points where the industry favors complexity for no discernible reason. Companies make things overly complex for no good reason. And sometimes, like in the case of MITRE, for example, let's beat up on MITRE, purposefully making things complex so that they can sell you a decoder ring. So there's no post-incident reports ever for any of these things. Nobody knows what happened. Nobody knows how the attackers got in and did what they did. And nobody knows what the company is doing to fix the problem or what was wrong in the first place. There's no root cause analysis that's made public, so that nobody else in that industry or that vertical will learn from the mistakes of a company that got breached. Or how to change behavior to address any security gaps. Aviation does this extraordinarily well because they have these huge public write-ups for like if a part fails or if something goes wrong, there's this huge investigation and it is publicly shared. You can go and look up aviation reports that describe, here's the problem that we found, here's the part that was in question, here's the manufacturer, here's how we are addressing it, here's how we're replacing the part, and here's what we're doing to make sure that this never happens again. That happens in aviation because if a plane fucks up in the sky, people die. Like the last thing you want is a plane to fall out of the sky because somebody used the wrong widget or a wrong gasket or the wrong button or something like that. Cough, cough, Boeing. But in computer security, this doesn't happen anywhere ever because people feel like it's embarrassing. Like even in scenarios where they're inheriting an environment that they didn't build themselves, if they're being brought onto an organization, they still feel embarrassed that they did something wrong and they don't want to get egg on their face, when that's completely the wrong attitude to have. If they were to say like, look, there was a problem and objectively speaking, here's how we should fix it, everyone will learn from that. And lastly, and here's this really interesting part, which another sort of unspoken thing, executive staff tend to be paid mostly with stock and bonuses, both of which hinge usually on market value. And the market value of a company has nothing to do with security, almost ever. So executives are incentivized to do what the shareholders and the board of directors want versus what the customers actually need, or what the law demands, or what needs to happen to make the company secure. So the people that work in security, the security executives, don't do security because they're not incentivized to do security. They're incentivized to act suspiciously and terribly by Wall Street flat out, because the only thing that matters to those people at the end of the day is as long as the graph is going up and to the right. So if doing security doesn't make the graph go up and to the right, they don't do security. Haroon Mir and Adrian Sanabria had a really great talk that I've been spamming around at Virus Bulletin last year. And in their keynote, Adrian had this slide up. This is an updated version, which explains just how many security companies there are. And no, Phobos isn't anywhere on this list. So this is definitely incomplete. But they cover basically just how broken the industry is from a multitude of different perspectives. And they did a very good job distilling their keynote down for our purposes today. There are several talking points that that'll form a critical foundation upon which my presentation is built. So the first of which is this sheer volume of vendors. Adrian said that you can fill 3 RSA show floors with just how many there are if they were to all get booth space. Next, and this, again, the sheer number of conferences. In 2019, there were close to 600 B-Sides events in 52 countries, and that's just B-Sides, with over 2,000 total conferences worldwide. If you do the math and average it out, that's 5.7 conferences a day, every day, all year for the entirety of 2019. So there's all these vendors, there's all these conferences, and we still can't fix SQL injection. So more than 9 out of 10 companies have to be notified by a third party that they have been breached because they have no idea. So what the fuck are their security programs actually doing? And where is all that money going? Because it's not going into security. So the median dwell time in 2019 was 205 days. That means attackers had access to the inside of corporate networks for 6 months on average before being detected. So again, all these cons and all these companies and all these products appear to have zero material effect on attackers. They're still getting in and doing whatever they want for 6 months before they get noticed. The relationship between investors and companies is also completely broken. Investors rely on analysts who are essentially bribed to tell them what's interesting for investments. And the way that they come up with that data is by looking at gimmicks and fabricated credibility that these startups can produce. So Haroon states that if a company has lots of salespeople, a booth at Black Hat, swag, parties, and all the stuff that we normally see at RSA and Black Hat, it is imbued somehow with this nebulous credibility that makes it seem good, despite all of that show of effort having absolutely nothing to do with the quality of the products or services that company offers. It's literally they're filling the air with glitter, and that's getting them investment dollars. Investors will make investment decisions based on that and not the real measure of how good a product is, which in turn fuels the previous graphic demonstrating how many companies there are in the space and how few of them actually matter. 30% of security issues in the US government come from security products. Think about that for a second. Almost a third of the problems that the government has in computer security came from products that are supposed to fix computer security. Antivirus vendors, Cisco, FireEye, you name it. They all release security products with vulnerabilities that add risk surface and add vulnerabilities to environments. So most security products don't actually go through any kind of security review themselves. And that is both the most hilariously ironic thing I've ever heard, and it is also the stupidest thing I've ever heard. The customers don't seem to know, and the vendors don't seem to care, predominantly because everyone's still getting paid. And if everyone's still getting paid, nobody's asking any questions. So CISO's report, and this is another really hilarious point for me, CISO's report that pushy salespeople from these companies are their biggest problem on a day-to-day basis, persistently harassing them to get a bit of their budget. So again, take a step back and think about that. The person who's in charge of security at a company, their biggest problem day to day is nagging salespeople who bother them to try and get a piece of their budget. Like, the biggest problem for a security executive isn't security, it's the vendors. So analysts are literally bribed, wined and dined so that they write favorable things about the people that are paying. And that's how companies end up in that upper right-hand quadrant of Gartner, because they paid to be there. So it seems like as long as everybody's getting paid, nobody wants to ask any questions. Adrian invented a fake person named Paul and a fake company called Accipitermon. And he was able to outright buy awards for a company that didn't exist, for a person that didn't exist. And then this cutout was getting C-suite level job offers on LinkedIn. Like there were people offering executive leadership jobs to a person that didn't exist. So it turns out you can just buy credibility. And buying credibility in this way convinces investors to pump money into companies, and it makes customers believe that a vendor actually does stuff because you can just buy that perception. So Haroon goes on to say that it's insane that we let these orgs just lie to our faces and we buy their stuff anyway. He's famously quoted here saying, if my doctor had even one fake certificate on his wall, he wouldn't be my doctor anymore. And nobody is rushing out to buy hardware designed by Gartner. So the status quo here gets a lot of people paid great sums of money. All of these moving parts and all of this complexity gives way to people simply unsubscribing from paying attention to it. Since it's so vast and so complex, people don't even try. Now, having seen the perspective of these luminaries, the status quo is basically false advertising, fake purchased credibility, non-functional products, and the overwhelming majority of these exist almost entirely to please compliance auditors and used in that regard with great success to get those auditors off the company's back for one more year. I've personally seen orgs use overwhelming complexity to keep auditors from touching actual equipment and doing the entire audit based entirely off of Word documents and Excel spreadsheets. So it's not surprising at all that these breaches continue to grow in number because we're literally in this endless loop. Terrible investors back terrible companies who release terrible products that don't work and add risk when they get hacked. Or they add risk, and then when they get hacked, they move to another terrible vendor and the cycle begins again. Participating in security, in the security market in this prescribed way, you will never ever materially affect change because the market is literally designed to prevent you from changing it from the inside. You're gonna ruin all these people's ride, and they don't want you to ruin their ride, so they're gonna work against you. Both of these talks are very, very good talks. I encourage you to go watch them both. Alex, Adrian, and Haroon are very well-spoken people, and they're very experienced presenters and deliver excellent talks. So when you're done here, please go watch them. So moving on, this brings us to the people of security, the employees, the executives, the consultants, the service organizations. Anybody that's had the misfortune of seeing my Twitter feed will tell you one of the things that I rail on very hard are people who behave like the aforementioned companies, people who buy credibility, people who are unqualified to do their jobs and will happily take a security job and fake it till they make it. These people are the reason why offensive security started doing proctored exams with webcams, because these frauds were paying dudes in India to take their exam for them so that they could have the cert. And this GIF, to me, is perfect because it represents what actually happens when companies maintaining the status quo discover that they've had an attacker in their network for 6 months. So, you want a degree? You just buy one. Go to your degree here and just add to cart. Check out now. You want a CISSP? That's cool. You can do that too. You can't necessarily get the actual cert. Maybe you can, but what a lot of these vendors are doing is offering like try as many times as you want until you get it type guaranteed pass courses. So here's one where it says your 2020 CISSP review, you give them $900 and they'll basically guarantee that you get the cert. If you want the OSCP, it'll be a little bit more challenging. You can't necessarily just buy it like you can with the CEH or the CISSP. But because there is, or there was anyway, it's probably changed. I haven't taken it since 2009, but so far as I know that until very recently, it hadn't changed since 2009. So people were, one person would squeak by just barely, and they would then write up their experience so that their friends could take the test and just check all the boxes and do all the things without actually trying or learning anything. They just, here's a guide to how to pass the final. So as I understand it, they've changed it recently. But even the good certs that we like the OSCP, aren't safe from people trying to game the system. Hiring someone to take the OSCP for you is a little bit harder than just Googling really hard. But if you look hard enough, you will absolutely find people that are happy to take the test for you if you pay them enough. CEH, same thing. You want the CEH, you click add to cart, check out now, you give them enough money, and they'll say whatever they want to, spit shine your persona. And if that doesn't wet your whistle, you're more of the I want to chill on LinkedIn, and I want to have a more organic feeling. I don't want these organizations that I can just buy credibility from. I want human beings to enhance my credibility. Well, you can do that too. There's this LinkedIn jetpack thing where you can buy endorsements and buy recommendations and buy LinkedIn connections and buy likes and buy followers. As long as you have that money, as long as you give them that money, they'll make your persona behave however you would like to behave. And you'd say, but Vis, how could any of this work? There's got to be an HR department, right? When you submit your resume to a place for a job and they decide they like you, don't they call in your references? Don't they interview you? Yes, they do. And there's some bullshit for that too. Here's a site called Career Excuse, which is celebrating their 10th year. They've been up since 2009, where if you don't have real references and you want fake references, you give them money and they will be your references for you. So you can just buy them. So I used to say that we, the security community, were the antibodies of the internet. Then an academic lady stole that phrase from me and used it in a TED Talk and got a boatload of press, and they attributed that quote to her. So case in point. If you want to be a surgeon, like a doctor that cuts people open, you need more than a decade of work. But to be a surgeon for a massively complex computer system or network, you can just watch some YouTube videos, and you can buy your way to success by buying these certs or references or credibility, as long as you have that cashy money. So to be a doctor, here are 8 steps. First, you do all of your undergrad work, which is everything up to and including your bachelor's degree. Then you take your MCAT, which is a test that allows you to apply to medical school. Then you have to get into medical school and go through all of medical school. Then you pass a 2-part license exam. Then you do a residency for at least 3 years, and then you have to pass another exam. And then when you're done with that, there's 3 more steps. You have to get board certified. Then you have to get licensed in the state in which you intend to practice. And then after all of that, now you can apply for a job to be a doctor at a hospital. That's 12 years. Computer security, buy some certs, lie on your resume, buy some references, lol, whatevs, nobody cares. The companies hiring don't seem to care because they need people to drive products that don't work, to secure data that they don't understand from attackers that have already been in their network for 6 months. That's where we are today. That's State of the Union, Computer Security, March 2020. Additionally, all of these issues lend themselves to secondary problems. And unless you're a security veteran, unless you've been doing this for a long time, it is impossible to tell fraudulent applicants from legitimate ones. People steal research and tools with zero accountability, and every attempt at a central authority, similar to a medical board for doctors or a bar for lawyers, results in orgs like ISC2, who basically print money because they're totally cool with certifying frauds to go work as pros in complex environments so long as the paperwork looks right. So where does that leave us? Binary explosives. You mix 2 parts together and you get explosions under the right conditions. In the case of tannerite, technically there's that 3rd piece, which is the bullet that needs to be fired to cause the explosion. So technically it's 3 items, but the explosives themselves are still 2 parts. They're still explosives without the trigger. So in our case here, the internet is that bullet. On the one hand, we have companies that behave fraudulently, and on the other hand, we have people that behave fraudulently. And when you put those 2 together, you get our current status quo in the security industry. You get root shells on FireEye devices. You see Deloitte getting popped. You see Chubb's cyber insurance getting ransomware, which was just this week. And the list goes on and on and on. And nobody will say anything because they're very happy getting paid vast sums of money to produce this illusion of security. So let's get some examples of these completed digital binary explosives in action. So since Chubb was in the news just this week for getting ransomware, we should pick on them first. Actually, this article was from Zach yesterday. First thing we can look at is, hey, they have a whole bunch of IIS 7.5 servers available on the internet. That's probably bad. And you would think that maybe that's a one-off, but you'd be wrong. Next, we have, I posted this one on Twitter the other day, you can RDP to their internal network. That's, that didn't RDP just have a whole bunch of problems like 2 weeks ago? Like, you'd think that a company that deals with insurance that hinges largely on compliance, and compliance hinges largely on patching, like, you'd think that this would be somewhere mentioned anywhere at all, but of course it's not. Then you'd think, oh, how bad could it be? Maybe RDP doesn't have an exploit. Maybe RDP is safe for now. Maybe they patched the ODay for RDP on that host, but for some reason they're happy leaving IIS 7 online. Well, cool. If we do a quick lookup in some of the password dumps to see what their exposure level is like there, I have almost 7,000 rows in my database, 813 rows actually having non-zero or clear text password. And some of those passwords are things like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which again, if we're talking about like a company that does cyber insurance, which again largely hinges on compliance, somewhere there's password complexity, I'm sure, as a speaking point, and I don't see it. And out of 813 credentials, I don't know. I think it's safe to say that maybe a dozen are probably shared credentials or password reuse, right? Probably a safe assumption that out of 813, a little bit more than 1% are shared somewhere. But if we go look at the perimeter, I could literally do this all day, but like their main website, the huge graphic on the bottom that goes across the entire slide, their main Chubb.com, their main website, IIS 8. A bunch of their other stuff, IIS 7.5. We can see that they're using VMware Horizon. Hey, maybe some of those passwords work. Besides Horizon, I also saw Citrix and NetScaler. So they have like a bunch of different solutions that they're trying to solve the same problem with. And obviously they have 3 competitors all working in the same org. They have directory listing enabled in some places. They have a bunch of test servers up running .NET. Like, the list goes on and on and on and on. And then if we zoom out a bit, we can see, and this is almost traumatizing to me, Chubb has a /16. An insurance carrier has a /16. I don't know what they're doing with all of that /16, other than putting basically target practice on it. But that's what we got for Chubb. So it looks like they registered it in 1992. Holy crap. And they updated it in 2006 in terms of their registration for their CIDR mask here. And if we glance at what we're looking at from like a top-down, show me everything, and just show me what's on fire mode, let's look at just the versions of the web servers that they run. So this is Chubb. Looks like their most popular Apache web server is 2.4.23, which was released January 2019, which is far newer than some of their other stuff, but still, oh my God, like their main production web server is like over a year old, followed by 2.4.34, which is slightly newer, but still no. And then they're predominantly, there seem to be a Windows shop. You compare the numbers here, that the IIS screenshot on the right is a lot more burly than the Apache screenshot on the left. Their most popular IIS web server is version 8.5, which was released in October of 2013. And then their next most popular is IIS 7.5, which I didn't even go look for a date for, because I'm just getting nauseated thinking about it. So that being the case, I think it's pretty trivial to say that we, if we feel like it, we can breach that perimeter and we can get in there and we can launch the missiles. Next, let's look at Capital One. They were just in the news recently because, according to a source with a direct knowledge of the breach, the problem stemmed from a misconfiguration with an open source WAF. somebody misconfigured mod security and allowed someone to gain access to hundreds of millions of credit card records for hundreds of millions of customers. So I'm not 100% sure what Capital One's security budget is, and they probably wouldn't tell me if I asked, but I'm willing to bet that it's either tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, because they're a massive global organization. They deal with finance, and those finance folks tend to print money. If they made a mistake of that flavor, misconfiguring a WAF leading to a breach, the chances are really good that there's problems just like that elsewhere in their organization. In, I think, 2009, called CapitalOneBowl.com, which the domain doesn't exist anymore and no longer resolves, but the SSL cert is still there because the box is still up. And we can see from this screenshot that the in the bottom right that the OU is marketing and the CN is Capital One Bowl. So what this tells us is that in 2009, I guess, but it says not before 2014. It looks like they renewed this in 2014 for some reason, but they stood this box up in 2009. The marketing department did, and this was some Super Bowl related something, and it's still there. And if you go to it, this is what you get. You visit the IP, you get PHP 5.3 on kernel 3.2.0 with a compilation date of April 4th, 2014. And PHP API is dated 2009. And I've never seen this before. I've been doing this for a very long time. If you hit refresh on this page, it changes all the colors. Like, I don't know why. So somebody took the time to customize PHP info so that when you refresh, it puts random colors in the table. Okay. So if we kernel 3.2, PHP 5.3, compilation dates in 2014, and API dates in 2009. So I don't know, again, same thing. I don't know what Capital One's budget is for this sort of thing. But it's obviously not going into security, because I found this morning at 2 a.m. Like, that's this less than 24 hours ago. To see how big their infrastructure actually is. And I hope that the bandwidth is working out well, because I had trouble fitting all of this text and all of these screenshots on the slides. There's just so much of it. I aimed a mass at Capital One and discovered this ridiculous ocean of different providers and ISPs that their footprint is sort of stretched over. And it's all over the place. Akamai, Yodlee, XO, RFC 1918 address space, and like localhost in like 10.192. addressing. Salesforce, Sapient, Amazon, Experian, Google, Telia, CenturyLink, Cloudflare, UUNet. Oh my God, UUNet. Talk about time travel. Like, ugh. And it goes on. There's more. Like Level 3, SendGrid, Microsoft, Hertzner. The list goes on and on and on and on. And I had to stop this brute force because it went for 16 hours and was showing no signs of stopping. So I had to kill it to take the screenshots. And there's more to be found. Like, this is just me screwing around for like a few hours to see if I could find some interesting stuff. So thank you, Capital One, for seemingly setting your missiles out on your doorstep so we don't even need to breach your perimeter to fire them. I'm sure that 10-year-old marketing box that you have floating out on the internet has been perfectly sanitized and totally does not have any logs or SSH history or keys or bash history or anything that we could possibly abuse. Or, you know, we can't pop it and set it up and use it as a proxy for our own malware so that like us running a C2 on that doesn't look like it's Capital One, because what could possibly go wrong? So to me, this looks like these example companies are throwing money and technology at their problems as though that's the answer to everything. Just pack some more Blinky boxes in, hire some big name orgs, and they'll take care of the problem for us, right? Serverless and the cloud, like they do all the security. We don't need to do security. So the comparison between doctors that have to go through 12 years of work to practice medicine and infosec pros who can just buy their way in seems a lot more apropos. Because our job right now as infosec people is to tell people how to behave in order to have a strong defensive posture. In order to do that, we have to be well-versed in the technologies that are in use, how they work, what they do, and how attackers can misuse them. And there's not a lot of that at all. At the end of the day, I think that we as a culture, we have this imperative to improve because it's obvious that the status quo doesn't materially affect attackers. And I say that a strong foot forward here is to reevaluate how we hire people, to police ourselves way, way better, and to call out thieves and frauds and measure ourselves differently. It's staggeringly clear that what we've been doing up until now just doesn't work. Our measure of success doesn't seem to be the customer is safer, but it needs to be. So this is the reason why people who do security work feel like the work that they do doesn't matter, because many people working security jobs don't impact anything. And that makes them sad because they want to feel like they matter and they don't know what to do to fix it. So I'd like to leave you all with some advice. All of this is up to you, the community, the people in the trenches doing the work. If you take a job that doesn't matter, you're contributing to the problem. If you're faking it until you make it, you're making it worse for everyone else. If you're helping a company build a product that doesn't work, just stop. The average length of infosec job time is about 2 years. So if you're at a place and you don't feel like you're making a difference or you aren't happy, just go somewhere else. It's really that easy. I know that that's a tall order for some folks, but if you want to make a difference, it starts with your willingness to act. Thank you very much. And I think we have maybe some time for Q&A, I think.
Cool. Thanks for the talk, Vis.
Yeah.
Entertaining as usual, especially
Thanks.
like the literal missile launching part.
Yeah.
You know what it was kind of, there's a little bit of chatter in here, but who actually does take the time to make PHP info like disco mode, as somebody called it? Like
disco mode?
Who does that? Who makes the colors like that?
Yep. That's a good question. I've never seen that before ever in my life. Like,
no, I don't think I had until you just put it up there.
Yeah, and I would just like F5, 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 and I'm like, oh my god, it's actually, you know what? I think I might hold on.
Yeah, somebody suggested that I was missing the 90s blank tag, right? The blank
90s thing.
Lots of good talk, fantastic talk kind of stuff. There are a few questions. So one question is, do you have a write-up somewhere for your dumpster diving Shodan Safari process or any pointers that you get a lot of mileage out of that might not be well known?
Here it is, live. What? The actual fuck? Why?
I really want to know who is behind that.
What the dude, so do I have a write-up? Not really. A lot of it's very organic. The first time I ever did like the live on stage showdanning thing was at HushCon, and I had to basically pull it out of my ass because they asked me to be a backup speaker. And because I didn't make CFP that round, I didn't bring my laptop, I don't think. So I had to like borrow somebody else's machine, log into Shodan, and I was just like, bring me alcohol, we're going to do it live, and started taking pot shots and stuff. And people in the crowd were shouting.
I'm trying to decide if I would ever want you as a backup speaker at KernelCon or not.
Well,
it sounds like it probably would have been okay.
Well, I'm fortunate in that I'm totally okay making an ass of myself on stage so that other people can have a good time. But yeah, so like a lot of it's been pretty organic, but effectively, like if anybody in the crowd's ever played games like Monkey Island or like the old school LucasArts point and click adventure games, it's literally like take object A and rub it against object B, and then like maybe a key falls out and the plot progresses, right? So in this case, it's like pick a target company or pick a target technology and then just do like, I call them pivot searches. So like one really good strategy that I use is find a company's website and go look at the SSL cert details. Look at like the OUs and the CNs in the SSL cert and see if there's any subject alternative names in the DNS section. Because like sometimes you'll have like a block like this of additional DNS names that a cert is good for. And some of them are internal. Some of them don't resolve publicly. You get a lot of really colorful findings that way. And then like some of the things that you'll discover are like, hey, here's a domain that I did not know was associated with this company. And now we can do a pivot search and search for every SSL cert on the internet that has that domain in it. And then suddenly like you're finding, Linode and Rackspace and like weird European vendor VMs that have SSL certs on them that have no association with the target company, because like in the case of this one we're looking at, this ridiculousness is with my cursor, this absurdity here that I can just keep hitting refresh on and changing the fucking colors. What is this nonsense? This is a box that somebody put up and abandoned, and it's been there for 10 years. Like, that's how this, like, I've seen this happen at like customers who they like one customer one time removed a machine out of their Confluence wiki because it was scheduled for decommissioning, and because the machine was no longer in the wiki, the people who were supposed to decommission it thought somebody else had done it for them, so they just didn't do anything. They didn't even check. So this box stayed up for years and years, and that's how we got in. And amusingly, it was a ancient Windows machine running IIS and some ASP and PHP stuff, and we were able to shell it, and it had not been rebooted in well over like 2 or 3 years. So, of course, you drop Mimikatz on that, and you have pages and pages and pages of creds, and that's how we breached the perimeter there. But like, that's a very common way that people get in. It's exactly this. It's like a company will stand up a box and forget about it entirely. Or this could potentially have been the box. It could have been a box that marketing stood up and didn't tell anybody about. So maybe IT and maybe security have no idea that this actually exists. But, who knows? I would imagine that a company like Capital One with their effectively endless budget would be able to do inventory, but maybe that's asking too much. I'm not sure.
I think these days that's called discovery. You have to go. Yeah. You have to rediscover what's on their own network. I think you got thanks that you answered the question that they asked. So thanks for that. One more, sure. Which is curious to see if you spent time thinking about this or if it's sort of a answer on your feet kind of thing. But earlier in your talk, you said that the market for security vendors is literally designed for organizations to fail by purchasing the vendor's products. Do you think the market for these products is like actively designed to be that way, or did it just sort of organically get there over time to where it is today?
Have you ever played Scorched Earth?
I have not.
Do you remember Scorched Earth? Okay, Scorched Earth is a tiny. I have a browser up. I'll just go. I'm in control. Scorched Earth. Hey, it's Friday.
Scotch gets all over that. That's one of his games.
So, Scorched Earth, like, here's a. I'm literally dealing with like 4 monitors, so I'm losing control of my mouse. Here we go. This is a good one. Scorched Earth is a little game from the 90s, like super old school. Back when computers had turbo buttons. And it was a little game that gave rise to games like Worms, where the objective of the game is you're a little tank, and you see these little tanks. You could probably barely see them because of the resolution. But the idea is you shoot a little bullet and you try and hit the other tanks. That's it. That's the whole game. The interesting component of this game was that it was designed in an era before the internet really existed. And to play this game, you would, and this is where laughably NCIS is actually kind of right. You had multiple people sat at one keyboard using their own keys to control their tanks to shoot each other. If you didn't want to play with 2 or 3 people cramped in front of a 386 with one keyboard, and all the sounds from this were PC speaker, by the way, so it's all bleeps and bloops. But you could play with a computer. You could have up to 10 tanks, and you would be one tank, and there'd be 9 computer players. And there were different skill levels. And the first one, I think, was like Tosser or Moron or something. Like, if you go and look at the skill settings for like the intelligence you can give the other AI players, or not even AI, but just like the computer, you could make them complete idiots. This game had a market in it where between rounds, you were given money and you could use these monies to buy different weapons. There were different options that you could turn on in the game. For example, like turning on tracers. So like you shoot a little bullet and it draws a little line to show you where it went, or shields or things like that. However, there were there's ammunition you can buy that is also tracers. So you have this scenario where you have a configuration option in the game which will invalidate the use of certain options or certain weapons you can buy. And that was a config option in the game as well. It was called useless items. And I reference this all the time, and I'm starting to realize that apparently very, very few people played this game. So next to nobody is familiar with this term.
Just to cut in briefly, it turns out many people have played the game, at least many of our attendees. Just nobody knows that's the name of the game.
Yeah, Scorched Earth.
Everybody remembers it as like tanks or something else, right?
That's right. But so the concept here of useless items is that if you turn tracers on in the game, but you can still buy the tracers, but it just wastes your money because it doesn't do anything. Like technically the tracer still works, but because tracers are on in the config, like you just burned a bunch of money to do nothing. So the advantage that you get as the player with some marginal, my 4 neurons that barely work, and a marginal amount of intelligence is to set yourself up as the human player, set up 9 computer players, turn on useless items, and make all the opposite players morons. Like literally that's a skill setting. You can label them morons. And what'll happen is that there's a pretty good chance that the morons will buy useless items that don't do anything, and you will win the game because they will burn all their money on stupid bullshit that doesn't work. So largely, from what I can tell, having done this for as long as I have, is that the market is flooded with useless items. And the reason that they exist is because the vast majority of computer security in corporate America exists almost entirely to basically fillet auditors. People conflate compliance and security all the time. And if they were the same thing, they'd be called the same thing. But like, you can totally buy, Norse, you remember Norse? Like Norse invented bullshit that didn't exist. It was completely vaporware. They had heavy investment, and famously, the last thing that people saw about Norse was their black hat booth, with the TV still stood up with their little pew pew map. They're the ones that invented that pew pew map. The company had gone defunct. It was gone. It didn't exist anymore. So how could that pew pew map be real? So like, when people ask like, is this market set up to fail? No, it's not set up to fail. It's set up to give people the illusion that there is security. It's set up so that we can give rich white executives the perception that people give a shit about their company or their network, because there's all this pomp and circumstance and all of this effort that goes into showmanship of like, look at all these numbers and look at all these things. Like, God, what was it? 2015 or 2016, I want to say, 44Con in London. There were these German security researchers that figured out that if you sent a 7-zip to a person who worked at a company that was being protected by a FIRE IPX device, the FIRE IPX device would pick that 7-zip up off the line and try to decompress it. And if you were to create that archive the right way, you could force it to decompress with static paths, which meant you could overwrite files on the system, because of course on the back end, FireEye did all this as root. So you send one email and they get an email with a zip that has some Python scripts in it. And they're like, what the fuck is this? Why do I care about this? Doesn't matter. That's irrelevant. What happened in the transmission of the email was that the parser for RTF files got overwritten in the FIRE IPX device. Instead of being the original Python script that was the parser, it was now Python interpreter running as root, or written to the disk as root. Then the attacker would send another email to that same recipient with an RTF file. And that email being sent would trigger the FireEye to launch the RTF parsing Python script, which is now Python interpreter. So the attacker's got a root shell phone home running, with an interpreter shell. So like, and this is FireEye we're talking about. Like this is ostensibly a company to whom you'd pay $250,000 for this fancy pants security appliance that's supposed to be protecting your company from emails. And as it turns out, if you send 2 emails the right way, then you shell the box. So like the vast majority of what I can see is actually happening is all just smoke and mirrors. It's all a show. It's Hollywood, but for security. This is reality television, but for hackers. Or rather, it's reality television for business executives who have a gun held to their head by compliance requisites and want to do as little as they humanly possibly can to get those auditors off their backs for a year. And in a small corner way over here, screaming, are all of us saying like, you're doing it wrong. Like, can we try something else? So that's where we're at.
That's where we're at, and a story about how we got there.
Yeah.
One more. Got a question about, who's doing it right. So like basically, specifically about like certifying or standards bodies in infosec or software development shops. Like who's actually doing things right?
So effectively, the phrase sort of measure twice, cut once comes to mind immediately, which is like, let's say you have a perimeter that you're dealing with. And let's say, just hypothetically for the sake of argument, or let's beat up on Capital One. They have this massive sprawling external perimeter and somebody needs to take care of it. I don't know that anybody is. I think Jumanji is happening in their little garden right now, but let's use that as an example. Ideally, your measure of success is, well, I guess whatever's in your corporate policy. If your corporate policy is do a pen test, then technically, as long as you paid $50 to some kid in Indonesia who put a logo on a one-page report that says pen test, technically speaking, you're now measuring your own success in that way. But the people that are doing it right are the people that can effectively, at the end of the day, materially affect their own defensive posture or the defensive posture for their customers if they're in my space, if they're in a services organization. So the people that are doing it right are the people that can measurably tell that they've made a difference. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a huge difference, but like, let me get my slides back up again and I'll let's do that. So I'll show you when we go back to like, actually, this is the one I'm looking for right here. Yeah. So we look at this one and we see that they have the bottom, like Chubb. This is Chubb, this isn't Capital One, but well, we can still beat up on them. IIS 7.0 as their lowest in frequency IIS server that is publicly exposed to the internet. Doing it right would be, taking a quarter or a month or something and getting rid of all of those boxes and then going back and doing this search again and seeing no IIS 7.0 entries at all. Like, it's not mental, there's no mental gymnastics. It's not necessarily challenging. It's just measurable positive change. And when I say that, I don't mean like, oh, you're compliant. That doesn't matter. Compliance is irrelevant. Like, everybody who's been hacked in the last 5 years that's made the news has had like gold stars, compliance, everything was happy, everything was fine. Compliance doesn't matter. Stop caring about compliance. I never want to hear about it again. It's not security. We shouldn't be at security conferences ever. But for measurable impact, like this is a great way to sort of get your feet wet. Take an inventory. Find the worst possible thing in the inventory. Just one. Just find that one terrible thing. Find
Don't do it. Don't do it.
Find this.
Oh, not again.
Find this and get rid of it. That's just one thing, right? But it's measurable. And then do it again. Find the next worst thing and get rid of it. Because my job at the end of the day is to pretend to be China at people or pretend to be Russia at people for money. And the first thing that these attacker groups look for is low-hanging fruit. Now, you're never going to be completely bulletproof, but like this thing, trivially exploitable. This makes my job as an attacker exceptionally easy. So if you make my job harder, you are measurably, materially improving things. And it's never going to happen overnight. And only if you're really lucky or if you're in a good position, you can do this like hugely and broadly. But one thing at a time, you chip away at it and it will make a difference. And the bigger team you have, presuming that your team is full of people that actually know what they're doing, you can delegate, right? So just treat it like more threads. If you have 15 people on your team and all 15 people are like human beings with brains in their heads and know what they're doing, then you can do 15 of these things at once, right? You give everybody one job. So you have a month. Find the worst possible thing you can in our corporate environment. Maybe you're on a corporate blue team or a corporate red team or somewhere in the middle. And your job is to help make things safer. Find the worst thing and chase it down. And you will encounter resistance. You will encounter bureaucrats and red tape and people who make excuses. And you will find, and this is one of my personal, if I could shoot these people into the moon, people who introduce delays for no other reason than to cover their own ass because they don't know what they're doing and they want to buy enough time to Google. Like, bypass those people. Like, in certain circumstances, it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. And for like this right here, this fucking thing, I'm gonna hit refresh a few times. I gotta get it to change the colors because, oh God, it's so gross. Look at this.
It's
somebody
like,
willingly.
There can't be a worse combination. And then you refresh it a couple of times. You're like, nope, I was wrong. There's a worse one.
Somebody willingly built this and intentionally put this on the internet. Right?
Well, I mean, that's debatable. Like, it might not have been intentional.
What, do you trip and fall and like alter PHP?
Yeah.
Like PHP info.php? Like, oh shit, man, I got really, really, really drunk one day and decided to add random colors to PHP info and then put it on a corporate machine out on the internet and leave it there for 10 years.
I don't know. I read RSC 1918 and I think that this looks a little bit, if you squint, it's like a private address. I don't know.
Wherever you bought your drugs, take them back. Because they're shitty drugs.
I don't know. It makes the page look better.
Oh.
All right. Well, thanks, Fiss. Very entertaining talk and question and Q&A period. It's always good to have you here, especially in a track this time instead of as a keynote. So, the Bat of Doom track seems like a very fitting place for you to be giving a talk at KernelCon.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. This is my second time around, and I've had a great time both times. So please keep doing what you're doing. And thumbs up for the being able to stand up the whole virtualization thing really fast. When I was younger, I used to organize conferences and thinking about having to do this back then, like before Zoom existed and before any of this, it's just you're gonna need a lot of whiskey. So props to you guys. Well done, great job, fantastic so far. I hope this serves as an example to other folks that want to virtualize conferences. So hopefully we see more of this.
Appreciate it. We're doing what we can, and we'll see if we can help the community out.
Right on.
Yeah. All right. Thanks again.
Of course. I'll catch you later.